Bye-apocalypse, Bye-mageddon, bye-week hell, no matter what you call it, week 12 is here and it brings 6 teams of bye. So let's get into the week 12 starts and sits on the Fantasy First Down. Little known fact, when NSYNC performed Bye Bye Bye, they were actually talking about week 12 of the fantasy season. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Start and Sit show on the Fantasy First Down. Today, we're talking starts and sits, and boy, there's a lot of players out this week. So a lot of important start-sit decisions to be made. If you've got any questions, make sure you drop them in the comments below, or you can message me on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no worry. My rankings can be found over at ffdfantasyfootball.com, and it'll be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube as well. I've also got some articles out over at football.rasball.com. But let's get straight into the rankings for tonight. So we're starting off with the quarterbacks as usual. And look, you got Hurts, you got Jackson, you're starting them, but Justin Herbert pops up into the top 3. And that's a bit of a surprise, but he gets that fantastic matchup against the Ravens. This should be an absolute shootout. I know that Vegas, for example, is expecting this to be the highest scoring game of the week. They've got it at a line of 51 points. And I would probably take the over there. I think this is going to be a very aggressive game. We saw last week that the Steelers managed to hold the Ravens down quite effectively. I don't know that that's going to be the case this week. I do think that both teams are going to force their ways into score, and so I like both Jackson and Herbert. Jaden Daniels also gets a great matchup against Dallas, though is he going to need to really risk his body, or is he just going to pass and then run the game out with Robinson and Eckler? That's the real question there that I think affects his value. That's why he's a little bit lower than some people have him, for me personally. Colin Murray gets a good matchup against Seattle. Bo Nix has been surprisingly good. He's the QB7 on the season. I was traded for him in one of my leagues, for example. So he is a solid option this week against Las Vegas. Patrick Mahomes gets that solid matchup against Carolina. I do like him this week, though not as much as some others. Jared Goff, fantastic streamer. He was one of my top streamers last week, and he ended up being the QB1. I like him again against Indy this week. Anthony Richardson really bounced back last week, and against Detroit, I think he could have another good week, but he's very risky. He could also really struggle. We know he can always go both ways, so he is more of a boom-bust option. And Brock Purdy is obviously out. Brandon Allen, I will mention when he is in there as well. I haven't changed it since I made the graphics because it's already uploaded. Baker Mayfield, obviously next, along with Geno Smith, both solid streaming options. Mayfield has Mike Evans back at least, so he's a solid option against an okay Giants defense. But Geno Smith, he gets Arizona. You can typically attack Arizona more so on the ground, but we have seen teams have some success earlier in the season through the air. Maybe they go back to that a little bit this week. Jordan Love gets San Fran. Is he going to need to pass the ball when they don't even have Brock Purdy? That's the real question, but I do still think he's a solid option. Same thing with Tua against New England. You can really run against them, but I do think we'll see enough points to make him pay off. Everyone below this is a little bit of a risk. Drake May, solid option, but against Miami, it is very hard to pass. Matthew Stafford gets Philly, same deal. Very hard to pass on Philly, even though he has Kupp and Puka Nacua healthy for one of the few times this season. Sam Darnold gets Chicago, another tough matchup. And then you get those streamers who have better matchups, but they're very hard to trust. Tommy DeVito, for example, we know he can air it out sometimes, and Tampa's a good matchup, but he is very risky because he could really struggle and could honestly be benched at some stage during the game. Same issue with Brandon Allen, who for me will end up somewhere in this region here. It's just very hard to trust him besides the weapons he's got. Everyone below there, not particularly interested in. Running back wise, and Christian McCaffrey against Green Bay, you have to feel they're going to go to him a lot. Safer passing option for Brandon Allen, so I expect a lot of checkdowns. Plus, I think they just run the ball a lot because you can on Green Bay, and also because it's a safer option when you've got a weaker quarterback. Devon Achane scores a lot of points in good matchups. This is a good matchup against New England. I do think that a touchdown or two is not out of the question. We have seen that they've kind of phased Raheem Mostert out of the offense. It's a little bit sad, but then again, Mostert is aging. He's 31, I believe. Still a lot younger than me, admittedly, but but definitely for an NFL running back, a lot on the older side, especially for a speed back. So I do think that we're going to see them continue to phase him out as they try to get younger and bring Jalen Wright into the offense a little bit more. Saquon Barkley obviously has had a lot of boom weeks. Seems to be every second week, so this should technically be his week off. He's away against the Rams. I do feel like he could have another solid week, but I got Achane just slightly ahead of him. I've really battled with that, but realistically, you're starting all of these guys. Joe Mixon, tougher matchup against Tennessee, but still someone you've got to start. Same thing with Derrick Henry. Tough matchup against the Chargers, but you absolutely have to start him. Kyren Williams has been a little bit up and down, but he gets Philly. This is a tough matchup, but I do feel like we could see him return to the touchdown zone, or the end zone, as most people call it. This week, I feel like there's an opportunity for him to get right in that way. Kenneth Walker against Arizona, you can run on Arizona, so he bounces up the rankings for me. I feel like he's a good chance of having a good week. I would certainly start him. With Isaiah Pacheco out, Kareem Hunt all of a sudden becomes a fantastic option against the Panthers. Honestly, toss point moving up as high as 6th, but I feel like 8's aggressive enough. I feel like Williams and Walker are a bit safer. I do feel like they can really lean on Hunt, though, because they don't need to worry about breaking him because Pacheco is back very soon. Josh Jacobs gets San Fran, and there's a good chance they'll be leading, and therefore he'll be able to run. James Conner makes me nervous. It's a good matchup against Seattle, and he's been pretty effective, but there is also a very good chance that we see a lot more Trey Benson if they try to face him in. This becomes more of a committee. This is probably a sell high opportunity on James Conner, I think. He's someone that I more want to get off my team rather than trading for him later in the season. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery get Indy. Not the greatest matchup, but there's always touchdown upside in a game where I do expect them to score a lot of points. They're heavy favorites there. Brian Robinson Jr. against Dallas, heavy favorites. I expect there to be plenty of running in that game, just keeping Daniel safe. So he and Eckler are solid options. Eckler ran a lot more routes last week, and he ran a lot of routes. I think he got 9 targets as well. There are a lot of snaps where both of them are out in the field. But in this sort of game, I expect that Robinson's a good chance of a touchdown and a good chance of scoring well. Jonathan Taylor a bit lower than usual, but is very tough to run on Detroit. We have seen some teams have some success doing it, but it's really hard to trust Taylor, especially with Richardson in this situation. I feel like instead of checking down, he's more likely to scramble, and that hurts Taylor, so that's why he's lower than he normally would be. If they were favorites to win, I would have him a lot higher. Tyrone Tracy, look, it's hard to trust him against Tampa when they've got Tommy DeVito in there. I do feel like that really affects the offense. He's not the kind of guy that's going to check down a million times, and he's not the kind of guy that's going to keep the ball very safe and allow them to run the ball a lot. So this is not a great situation for Tracy, but he's still a very good back, and I feel like he will get a lot of opportunities. Stevenson against Miami. You can definitely run against Miami, but they are going to be behind. Do they trust Stevenson? I think probably yes. I even tossed up moving him above Tracy and Taylor. This should be a good matchup for him. Aaron Jones against Chicago should be able to run on Chicago, but Jones has like 3 touchdowns all year. They're just not using him that effectively. In PPR, he's a solid option, but he's got kind of a lower floor. With this bye week, though, you're probably going to have to start him. I think this is where it gets into the awkward zone where you're starting guys you don't really want to start, but you've kind of got to pick your poison. Chuba Hubbard, even with Jonathan Brooks back, he's still going to get the heavy part of the load. I think we always expected that. Brooks is never going to come back fully healthy. It's just not how it works. I expect that Brooks won't be too effective until next season, and even then it will be a committee. Tony Pollard, obviously going to be better with Tajay Spears out, but Houston is not an easy team to run on. We saw that happen last week where there was a lot of passing in that game. So I do think that that's probably going to be the case here as well, with Will Levis spending more time airing it out. I think that possibly Tennessee really struggle in this game. Bucky Irving and Rashad White against the Giants should be favorites here. Do they run the ball as much? Well, probably not now that they've got Mike Evans back, but I do still think that White has a chance of getting some work in the receiving game. So if it's PPR league, he moves up a bit, Irving moves down. Irving's still more of a touchdown threat and will get more running touches, though. J.K. Dobbins should struggle against Baltimore. This is not a game where the Chargers' backs are going to be well suited. He's also not getting all the goal line carries. They're using, for some reason, Hassan Haskins, and I do think that's going to really hurt them. So Dobbins is not someone that you can trust. DeAndre Swift losing a lot of the goal line carries and the receiving carries to Rashawn Johnson ever since they made that coaching change. So that makes me very nervous about Swift. But this week, you still just have to start him, even though they're underdogs and it's a tough matchup. Rico Dowdle, really hard to trust with everything Dallas is doing. But against Washington, it's an okay matchup. I feel like they're going to be behind, but he's going to still get some touches. you probably have to start him. Javonte Williams versus Audric Estime. It's going to be a hot hand situation. I predicted this last week. A lot of people overspent on Fab, but this was always a strong possibility. Go back and look at the video from last week. I talked about not going over the top with Estime. I do think the same thing's going to happen this week. They'll give them both a chance and then see which one's looking better and go with them for most of the rest of the game. We obviously saw Chubb and Warren already. Now, Madison and Zamir White are both doubtful for the Raiders. Amir Abdullah is someone that everyone's talking about being the likely guy, but it wouldn't surprise me if we see a fair amount of Dylan Lowby. He's only been active once this season, but he got a lot more every down work in the preseason, and I do think that it's possible that they give him a fair amount of early down load. Still not that much value in that against Denver. I still think Abdullah is going to be the one to have, especially in PPR, but I don't particularly want either of them. Roshan Johnson's the last guy that really interests me. He's getting those goal line carries. He's getting some receiving work. He at least has some starting upside, and he's someone you can kind of feel okay about starting. Everyone after that's a lottery ticket. Justice Hill, you just got to hope that there's a fair bit of passing in that game. Maybe they're behind and they need to pass. Trey Benson, I mean, who knows? Maybe they get ahead early and then they use Benson more. Maybe they start to transfer more of the load across to him. Maybe he breaks off a big run or gets a touchdown. That's all you're hoping for. Everyone after that, I don't feel good about any of them. I don't want to start anyone below that unless you have to. I think Lowby probably has the most upside. It is possible he's just the starting running back, but I think that's very unlikely. And I'm only doing that if I really need points. Wide receivers. AJ Brown, my number one this week with no Devonta Smith. It's a great situation for him. Amon-Ra St. Brown was very good last week. I think he'll be solid again. Justin Jefferson gets a tough matchup, but he's JJ. You can't not start him. Puka and Cooper Kupp, not the greatest matchup against Philly, but again, you have to start those guys. Nico Collins, again, must-start player, even though he's against Tennessee. Gets a little bit dicier after that. Tyreek Hill hasn't quite looked like himself, still struggling with that wrist issue. I do think that's going to affect him, but against New England, he's going to continue to get touches, and that defense is not fantastic, so I do feel like he might be able to make something happen there. DK Metcalf gets a great matchup against Arizona. I might move him ahead of Hill. I really like this matchup for him. Malik Neighbors with Tommy DeVito in this matchup. This is a great situation for him. He's another I might even move ahead of Hill. CeeDee Lamb against Washington. This is where it gets a little bit awkward, but he's getting enough touches, especially in PPR, that I think you can feel okay about him. This is where it gets a bit more interesting. Mike Evans coming off that injury. Do you trust him for a full workload? I think coming off their bye week, you have to assume that he's probably going to be okay. Cortland Sutton, this is a tough matchup against the Raiders. Probably the toughest matchup for an out wide receiver. I still need to start Mike Evans. I feel like he's going to be the number one option. It's just going to be harder for him to produce, but you can't give up on the fact that he could possibly go over 100 yards and get a couple of touchdowns. That's just always within the realm of possibility for Mike Evans. Same thing with Cortland Sutton, strangely enough. Gets that tougher matchup. Sorry, I said Evans had the Raiders. Evans has the Giants. I just don't think they're going to need to pass. Sutton has the Raiders, which is a tough matchup, but I do still think that he is going to be okay against them. Very, very solid since that donut he pulled up in week 7. All of a sudden, he's kind of broken out and been very good every week. I do think he's going to have another solid week, but there is a real possibility he's a dud this week, more so than most players in this range. Ladd McConkey against Baltimore. Baltimore's more weak out wide than against the slot, so that's why McConkey's not higher for me. He also doesn't have as much touchdown upside. He's kind of scored some fluke touchdowns and got one really early in the season, but realistically, he's more of a PPR threat. PPR, I probably have him up at 11, but in half PPR, he's lower for me. Zay Flowers against Chargers, tough matchup. Hard to feel great about him, but you still kind of have to start him. Same thing with Terry McLaurin. He's been very up and down against Dallas. They're not going to need him, but they probably still need to start him. Marvin Harrison Jr.'s had like 7 straight really tough matchups and a bye, so that's why the value on him's been really low. He's my favorite buy low candidate. He's got some easier games coming up starting today. Probably your last chance to buy low on him, and the fact that he even had some solid games in 2 of the last 3 weeks kind of hurts that as well. Jackson Smith-Njigba against Arizona. This is not a great matchup for him, but he's been good the last 2 weeks. You have to assume there's a possibility he just kind of rolls on with that, and that's why he's quite high up here. I'm quite high on Calvin Ridley. You can really throw on Houston, and I think that's probably going to happen with Will Levis going to Ridley this week. So I like Ridley's chances of a solid game. Josh Downs gets a fantastic matchup against Detroit. They're easiest to attack against the slot, so I do feel like Downs is probably the guy to attack in that game. Debo on Juwan Jennings, lower with Brandon Allen as quarterback. I might even move him lower again. Jaden Reed in that game, it's just hard to trust him week to week. He has these big games, but when they're winning, he has quieter games, and I kind of think they're the favorites here. Quinton Johnston gets that great matchup against Baltimore, but he's been very boom bust. He had that one breakout game with over 100 yards. He scored touchdowns in the last 3 weeks, but in the last 2 weeks, he hasn't actually been very good. The touchdowns kind of saved his value. DJ Moore finally had a good game last week, takes on Minnesota. With all these bye weeks, I feel like you kind of need to start DJ Moore, even though you don't want to. I mean, he's probably one of your better, most talented players, and he's always got the possibility of finally getting it right. Tank Dell with Nico Collins back loses a lot of value, especially with the way they're using their slot guys and getting Mechie and Woods out there instead of Dell and a lot of 12 personnel. That hurts his value, but I feel like you probably still need to start him despite the tough matchup and the lack of snaps. Jamison Williams, very boom bust. Against Indy, I feel kind of okay about it. DeAndre Hopkins with Juju back, that kind of hurts him. They really are rotating their guys a lot. Against Carolina, there's always touchdown upside, and that's kind of what you're hoping for here. One of their guys will have a big game. We just don't know who it's going to be. Probably not Hopkins, but you never know. It's more likely against Carolina to be one of the out wide guys, so he's got a chance, but I don't feel great about Hopkins. Jacoby Myers, bit all over the place at the moment, but I do feel like in this game he's got a chance of being okay, so I'm willing to start him. Roma Dunze against Minnesota. I mean, he's not getting the snaps at the moment, but he's starting to get a bit more. Do I feel good about this? Not at all against Minnesota, even though it's a great matchup. They're just not using him consistently. It's hard to know what Caleb Williams is going to do from week to week. They often run the ball a lot, even when they're behind, and that makes it really hard to feel good about their wide receivers. That's why he's lower down, and why you'll also find Keenan Allen quite low, especially against the Vikings, where their slot defense is okay. Christian Watson's been slowly improving, slowly taking snaps away from Zontavian Wicks. I like him this week. Even though they're not really going to have to attack the 49ers, I feel like he's another good buy low candidate for me. And Romeo Dobbs, again, solid option. Jalen Waddle's been really inconsistent this season, mostly just bad, but he didn't have Tua for some of that. He's got Tua back now and he's still not playing particularly well, so I don't feel great about him. Michael Pittman against Detroit should be a great matchup, but he plays out wide, and that's a harder matchup against Detroit these days than going to the slot. So for that reason, Pittman's kind of still just a mid-range guy for me. Xavier Worthy's got a bit of touchdown upside, so if you're looking for that pop, he's someone you can get in some leagues, in smaller leagues. Demario Douglas in a PPR league, it's a tough matchup against Miami. It's not like even for slot guys, it's better. Miami's defense is just really good. Their secondary is very solid. So Douglas, very hard to trust. It's easier to run on them. But because he plays so close to the line of scrimmage, it is possible he'll be okay. Jordan Addison had a good game last week, but takes on Chicago. Very hard to trust him. Everyone below him, not interested in, but you might be desperate because of bye week. So that's who's available as far as I'm concerned. Tight ends, Travis Kelce, he is the number one against Carolina. Big scoring upside, but Brock Bowers not far behind. I like his chances against Denver. George Kittle, he's just always a solid option. There's always a chance of scoring. Brandon Allen is not that bad a quarterback, and I do feel like the Kittle could be the one he goes to because he's more of an underneath guy. So I feel like he could have a solid game. Trey McBride, I think in PPR goes higher, but lack of touchdown upside really hurts him in half PPR. Kate Otten returns, and so does Mike Evans, unfortunately for him, and that's going to hurt him a little bit, but he's still better than the other options. There are some tight ends that are out either injured or on bye this week. Will Dissly has been popping off the last few weeks, which is great. I'm a Will Dissly fan, but I feel like he's only going to be good this week because it's Baltimore and they're going to need to pass the ball. I feel he's probably going to go back down again the week after, but I'm feeling okay about him this week. Kind of same thing against for Hunter Henry against Miami. He's actually gotten over 45 yards and 5 receptions, I think, in the last 4 of the last 5 weeks, which means he's getting nearly double-digit PPR points in 4 of those 5 weeks. That's pretty good for a tight end. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a floor, but less of a ceiling. Against Miami, you can kind of play against the middle of the field a bit better than out wide, but not a lot better. I do feel like Henry's probably an okay option, but Hockenson has more upside, especially with no Josh Oliver. You will see some Johnny Munt, but Oliver was taking a lot of snaps from Hockenson. They've kind of been easing Hockenson back in. I feel like he's nearly ready to go to a full load, and that's really going to help him. So I feel like Hawkinson's a good option. I might even move him up as high as 7 this week. Dallas Goedert, of course, with no Devonta Smith. He's another I'm considering moving up. Not the greatest matchup against the Rams, but it's fine. I do feel like he's someone who could have a good week. Janu Smith has these pop-off weeks and then does nothing in between. Hard to feel great about him. Against New England, it's fine. It's a fine matchup. Same thing with Sam Laporta. Just very inconsistent at the moment. Don't feel great about him. He was amazing last season. I don't know what's happened there. It's just disappointing. Very talented player. Hopefully he comes good later in the season. Tucker Craft, touchdown upside is really what you're hoping for here, and he does have a lot of touchdown upside, but that's basically all you're going to get from him. Zach Ertz, kind of the other way around. You're looking for targets from him, better PPR option, for example. Mark Andrews typically good in games where they're behind or close. They could be close in this game, but I think it's also possible that they're just better. In that case, Andrews not going to have a very good game, but he does have some upside. Isaiah Likely coming back definitely hurts him, though. So those guys both very risky. Dalton Schultz against Tennessee, this is fine, I guess. Jatavian Sanders against the Chiefs, assuming that Tommy Tremble's back, this is risky, very, very risky, but there's high upside. If there was no Tremble, I'd probably have Sanders as high as 13, but Tremble really adds some risk because you just don't know how many snaps you're going to get out of Sanders. But against the Chiefs, tight ends can be very, very good. Luke Schoonmaker and also Brevin Spann-Ford against Washington with no Ferguson. We saw them get a lot of ball last week. It's possible that'll happen this week. Probably not. Washington is kind of a tough matchup for tight ends, so it's not like a great situation, but you might be short on options. Everyone below that, not particularly interested. And that's all we've got for the Start Sit show for week 12. Good luck with all the buys, the injuries, and everything else happening. Hopefully, you're looking good for that playoff run. As always, if you've got any questions, start sit questions, trade questions, waiver pickup questions, feel free to comment below or message me on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. You can also check out my rankings at ffdfantasyfootball.com and my articles at football.rasball.com. Finally, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe so you can check out all of our content in the coming weeks. Wish you good luck for week 12.